Anyway, we're going to be looking at Exodus 14. Now, if you want to follow along, we're going to be jumping around a lot in Exodus, but you're definitely going to want to keep chapter 14 open because that's going to be our main focus if you're on your phone or if you have a Bible. Otherwise, I will be reading it to you also. So we're going to see, I think one of the main focuses is Moses tells the Israelites, the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The people that were their slave drivers for their entire lives, in fact, for over 400 years of slavery, the parting of the Red Sea is really the climax of this whole story. And I hate calling it a story because that makes it sound to me like it's fiction. So this isn't fiction, but this is the telling of the true story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt. And so this is really, if you're looking at it from a storytelling mode, this is really the climax of them dealing with Egypt. This, of course, isn't the end of their story, but this is, a lot of things come to a head at this point in Scripture. So I'm going to be reading Exodus 14. We're going to read starting in verse 21. I, of course, encourage you to read the entire chapter, to go home, but there's so much of it, I don't want to bore you by standing up here reading it. So we're just going to read 14, starting in 21. It says, they're at the Red Sea. The Egyptian army has pursued them, and the Israelites are trapped. So they can't get away. There's literally like an ocean on one side, the greatest army that they've ever known on the other side after them. So we're picking up in verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw them into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, "Let us get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." We're going to go back to that. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back into its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen. And the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea, none of them survived. So this is an interesting portion because it says, the one thing I caught this time that I haven't caught other times is it says that God did this with a strong east wind. So this big wind pulls up, and this is how God parts the waters. This is an example of God's complete control over nature, over the world he has created, and even, it seems, over the laws of physics themselves. In our day, we tend to have kind of the illusion that we have control. I call control an illusion because it is. But the illusion, especially with our devices and cars and how we can quickly get from one place to another, that we really have a lot of control going on. But all it really takes is one blast of the power of nature to throw you out of that mindset. Just a couple weeks ago, I don't know if you guys remember when we were having those very quick but freakishly strong storms. I actually got caught in the car in one of those, and we thought we'd make it home in time, but we didn't, and I had two of the girls with me, and it was just pounding water on the car, and I couldn't see anything. I couldn't even see in front of me the line to stay on the road, and it was so loud, and there was hail and wind, and we literally saw a branch fall off and fall on the side of the road next to us. I was trying to stay calm, girls, but I was terrified. So we pulled off kind of under this tree on this farm road because we were on 46, so there was no wind or buildings breaking the wind. And we just had to sit it out. There was nothing we can do. And it was one of those moments where you just go, wow, nature is powerful and God is powerful. And I'm just going to sit here because I have zero control over this situation. And God, please protect us because there's nothing I can do. I see this Red Sea as an extreme of one of those moments where they're trapped, there's nothing they can do, and then the power of God whoosh, sends the wind, parts the sea, and they're miraculously able to survive. And then he closes it, the sea, over their enemies. So like I said before, we're going to talk about that this chapter 14 is a climax of a lot of different things going on. And it's not just about God's power over nature, but it's also God's power over people and the way he works in their lives. So we have three really major players in Exodus at this point. We have Pharaoh, we have Moses, and then we have the Israelites. And I'm referring to them as a group of people. The Israelites as kind of one character. And their journeys really come to a climax at this point too. So we're going to look at where they were and where they've come to this point in the story. So first we have Pharaoh. I love Yul Brynner. I grew up watching this. I think every Easter it was on, the Ten Commandments. I was like, I could go with a modern one, and then I thought, no, poor man, he's Pharaoh for the rest of our lives. He's gone now, but he'll always be Pharaoh. Yeah. So he played a great king in several movies. So anyway, that is Pharaoh, though. So we begin Exodus seeing Pharaoh. He shows up, this particular Pharaoh shows up in chapter 5. And the first time Moses goes to him and says, let my people go, let the Israelites go. And really Moses only asks to go out for a couple days to worship God. And this is this man's response. This is in verse 2. Who is this Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. So that's our first meeting, and this is the attitude of this man right here in the beginning when he first appears in Exodus. And then he goes and he doubles down the work for the Israelites, for them even having someone ask to leave. This guy is a tyrant. He's a slave driver of the Israelites. And unfortunately, he is the greatest power in that area at the time. This is Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of Exodus. Over the next few chapters, we're going to see this sort of God versus Pharaoh thing play out through all the plagues. It's going to be, God tells, and then Moses, of course, is the go-between between God and Pharaoh. So it's, if you don't let them go, this is going to happen. And it happens, and Pharaoh still says, no, if you do this, then this is going to happen. And Pharaoh still says, no. A couple times he tries to give them kind of a part of what they want, but not, well, I'll let the men go. But God sticks to his guns and says, no, everyone needs to go, not just the men. And so, but Pharaoh, he stays very stubbornly to what he's going to that, these are his people, this is his workforce, his slave workforce, and he's not letting them go. He is the ultimate power, and he does not know this God, nor does he care what this God wants. Well, when his firstborn dies, and he's grieving, and his land and his cattle and pretty much everything of value in Egypt has been destroyed by the plagues, he does finally buckle and let the Israelites leave. But a few days later, he changes his mind and decides he wants them back. We don't really have a timeline, but in my mind, it's a few days. He gets to the anger stage of grieving and decides, nope, these people need to come back, we're done, and he actually sends the entire army out them. So it's come back or death. I don't know if the intent was to bring them back or if the intent was just to slaughter them for having the idea of even wanting to leave, but either way, he sends his army just a few days later, to retrieve and punish these people. So let's look at 14 now. We're going to look at verses 1 through 4. We're going to look at the setup here for the Red Sea and Pharaoh's confrontation with the people of Israel. So starting in verse 1 of chapter 14, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses," so this is the Lord talking, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi Hathor between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal-Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering out the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and his army. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites did this. So what's happening is they're leaving Egypt, and instead of taking, as the crow flies, straight over to the sea, they end up kind of wandering around. And God does this on purpose. And Pharaoh gets this false sense of confidence back that these people are idiots and can't even find their way out of his country. And they're really sitting ducks for him. And God did this. Pharaoh's being set up by God. This is one big setup. Right? Pharaoh thinks he's in control. He does not know this God. He is not going to do it. And God is setting, we could say, the dominoes in place to prove him absolutely wrong. He's actually playing right into God's plan. He's coming now to get the Israelites because he thinks they're lost and confused and can't even live on their own, basically, at this point. That's my add-in. If I were him, that's what I would think. If I were a tyrant, that's what I would think. Okay, so why is God doing this? Why is God doing this big setup? God says, "I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." You see, God has always been about not just bringing the Israelites back to himself. He's always been about bringing all people groups to himself. He doesn't just want the Israelites to know that he is the Lord and sovereign and cares for them. He wants the Egyptians to also know. He wants this tyrant to know that he is God and that he is in control and that he is the one who is master of the universe. So let's see if this happens. As the Egyptians, we read this, are crossing the sea, before the sea even comes over them, in verse 25, they're saying, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them." Now, they don't say their Lord, the Israelites' Lord. They say the Lord. I believe this is I am, who God told Moses is his name. They say, God is fighting for them. We need to get away. So basically, right before their death, the entire army of Egypt is acknowledging God's sovereignty. So yes, this is the climax for Pharaoh and Egypt. He goes from, "I don't know this Lord, I won't obey him," to, "This is God, he's fighting for the Israelites. We need to back down." But unfortunately, it's too late for them, and they end up swallowed in the sea. Interesting tidbit to add insult to injury. If you go way back to chapter 10, I believe it's verse 10, the locusts also are driven into the sea by a wind from God. So the mighty Egyptian army dies with the insects in the sea. Ouch. Ouch. May this be a warning to us to never deny God's presence and say, "What do I have with him?" But that's Pharaoh. Pharaoh's done now. We don't see any more of him in Exodus. This is really the climax and the end of his story in Exodus. Goodbye, Yul Brenner. This guy now. I forget his name. But anyway, this is Moses. We're going to look at his story now. Charlton Heston. That's it. Oh, Charlton. Anyway. So let's look at where Moses began. So I'm kind of skip his birth. We're going to go to the first time we see him as an adult. It says Moses was an adult. He goes out to see basically his people for the first time. And he sees, this is in chapter 2. Yes, it is chapter 2. And he sees an Egyptian beating an Israelite. And his response is, he kills the Egyptian. But before that, I shouldn't laugh. We would all do this. But before that, it says he glances this way and that. And then he goes out to kill the Egyptian. So he's making sure no one's watching what he's doing. He's basically rebelling in secret. He's like the vigilante of the night, going out and slaying a bad guy to fight for his people. Well, it turns out the Israelites he meets the next day don't really appreciate his vigilante move. And he sees them fighting, and he says, why are you guys hitting each other? Why are you fighting your fellow Hebrew? Why aren't you people united together? Why are you squabbling amongst each other? And just in him saying that, this, of course, is my opinion, but I kind of see him as just this young, at this point, this young sort of idealist who's going out to see really the suffering in the world for the first time. And his response is anger, violence, and confusion as to why these people haven't gathered together and you know, maybe they haven't done anything about it yet, but they're fighting each other. They aren't even fighting Pharaoh or the slave drivers. And of course, the Hebrews he meets don't appreciate that. I think if they were today, they would have probably called him very privileged, being a prince of Egypt. You don't understand what we're going through. Don't you come and tell us what we should be doing. You go back to your little world there. Well, he ends up having to leave and escape because Pharaoh of that time did find out that he had killed someone. So the next time, this is years later then, God actually does, with the burning bush, call Moses to be the deliverer. And he actually he's not a vigilante now, he has a calling to be the deliverer. And Moses' response here is, I have on the screen, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? He's obviously humbled at this point, but he's also very insecure. So he doesn't think that he could do it or should be the one to do it. So God gives him all these little miracles, like, leprosy and the snake and everything, just to boost him up, like, I've got you, this is going to work out. And then Moses gets upset because he has some sort of speech impediment. My version called it faltering lips. Maybe it's some sort of disability, I don't know. So again, he says, I can't do this. So God gives him Aaron to speak for him and to support him again. And so with the support, even though he's obviously feeling insufficient, Moses is obedient. And he does go to Pharaoh. And this is the big moment. He confronts Pharaoh. And then we saw Pharaoh's response on the other slide. And he doubles the work for the Israelites. And then the Israelites get angry at Moses. And they don't even believe that what God has told Moses, that they will be delivered. After this, Moses spirals back into insecurity. Chapter 6, verse 12. He says to God, if the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips? So we're back to the faltering lips again then. I'm not faulting him. It's amazing that he's even being obedient, but we're just following his story through here. He doubts that God can use him with his disability. Now, over the next few chapters, Moses, despite his fears, is going to be obedient, and through the plagues, he's going to keep going to Pharaoh over and over and over again. And he's going to see God come through over and over and over again, and we see that his faith is being built. One little side comment. After his calling from God, after God appoints him, Moses never again commits a violent act against the Egyptians. So his first thing, he murdered one and had to leave. But after the calling, he doesn't do anything more violent. God does all the punishing. Just kind of an interesting little fact I noticed. Now, there are times the Israelites are going to go to war, and they are going to have to do violent things. But for Moses, his calling is a turning point for him. He handles the deliverance of his people completely differently after God has called him. So now we get to the Red Sea. He's trapped. We got the sea. We got the army. And the Israelites basically are freaking out. They're saying, why did you take us out here? We should have we never wanted to be delivered anyway. And then this is Moses' response. And it's good to note that this is before Moses even talks to God about what to do. So Moses says this before God tells him to part the sea. And up there, Moses says to the Israelites, do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord that he will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. So this is how he has grown. This is how his confidence in his calling and his confidence in how God is backing him up and providing for him in his calling, this really comes to a climax and a turning point at the Red Sea. And again, this is before God even tells him what to do. He tells them to don't be afraid, stand firm, watch what God's going to do. And you don't need to take any action at this moment. God's going to do it for you. It's amazing if you think of where he came from. I pray that just all of us could get that confident about what God has called us to do. And get that confident in God's power and provision that our own disabilities don't come into play when we think about what God has left us to do. I want to get to that point in my life, and it is just my prayer that all of us do. And it's not a confidence in yourself. It's a confidence in God, and that God has your back, and no matter what happens, he has called you to this, and he will give you what you need to do it. And Moses got this way after one obedient act after another, and watching God come through each time. And then this whole thing with the Red Sea and parting and moving through must have just only confirmed to him exactly what he had already come to believe. And the Red Sea ends up being just this beautiful moment, that powerful moment that actually gets referred back to over and over again in the Bible. Like the Psalms is full of references to the Red Sea. Remember when I brought you out of Egypt? Remember when God parted the Red Sea and you walked through? I mean, I was going to find a psalm, and the first two I looked at had it. Oh, remember the Red Sea, going Egypt, the Red Sea. And then we're going to see it even in the New Testament too. So this is God orchestrated and took the time to orchestrate this, not just for the people at the moment, but for the generations to come. I mean, we're still talking about it today. It's still amazing. So it's amazing what God can do with a few obedient people. What can happen? Oh, Moses, we're going to have to move on. All right, we're at the Israelites now. How does their story come to a climax at the Red Sea? So obviously their story is going to go on through the entire Bible, but we're just going to look at one aspect of what's been going on with them in Exodus at this point. And It's really about what we're going to look at is the Israelites' relationship with God and their relationship with Moses as God's servant or representative. So we start off, with when Moses comes out and does his vigilante of the night when he's young and still a prince of Egypt, and then he sees two men the next day. Their response is, "Oh, thank you so much. You're super awesome. Thanks for sticking up for us and answering our prayer and killing one of our enemies." No, they say, "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" And then they mock him and say, "What, you going to kill us too? Like you killed that Egyptian? You privileged prince, go back to where you came from." If you take the two men fighting that actually say this, if they are in fact a representative of the Israelites as a whole at this time, you'll find that they are not united as a people group, or even in belief that they are going to be delivered. So it says that they've been crying out to God. So at this point, they've had faith enough to ask for deliverance, because it says they've been crying out to God and God heard them. But you'll see that when it comes to actually being delivered, their faith drops out, and they react, with anger and fear towards Moses. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation before, where you have faith enough to ask for something, but the faith stalls out when it actually comes to it being answered. You just don't quite believe that it'll actually be answered. And sometimes even when it starts to be answered, you get jaded, you get sarcastic and unbelieving when you start to see the answer. I've been there so many times. This is where the Israelites are at the beginning of Exodus. They're asking for deliverance, but they don't quite believe that it's actually could happen. Now, when Moses and Aaron first go into Egypt to confront Pharaoh and come in as the mouthpiece of God for deliverance, Moses and Aaron get the support of the Israelite elders. It's kind of this little snippet that I realized when going through this. So they get support from the elders to go and to, say, "Let my people go." But what happens is when Pharaoh says, "I don't know this God, get out of here," and then the Israelites, I don't know if this was the elders too, but it says the Israelites turn their back on Moses very quickly. They respond to Moses, "May the Lord look upon you and judge you. You have made us a stench to Pharaoh." So when the miracle started, the deliverance they've been praying for, things got worse before they got better, which oftentimes happens when you confront evil. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And their faith completely dropped out, and they turned on God and the one who's trying to deliver them. And we'll just keep going. And you see this a lot. We ran into this when we were adopting our son. I expected we get resistance from, government officials or, tyrannical leaders like Pharaoh or something. Where I didn't get what really, basically sucker punched me was when we got resistance and two of our adoptions had to completely come to an end because of the people who were caring for the children stood in the way. One was a social worker who wanted to bribe us, and it was more important to get a few $1,000s than for the child that was under her care to get family. And the other one was actually a nun from the orphanage who, for some reason, didn't want our family to adopt this little girl and lied and told us she'd been adopted somewhere else. And then a year and a half later when we got there she was at the orphanage. Fortunately, she had been matched with a woman from Norway, and they were a great match. And it was an amazing miracle to see that God had provided for her. But that just threw me. I thought, what? These are the people that should be supporting us in this. Why are they standing in our way and really just upending things for us? It's really hard. Because when God moves, when he's going to make a move, when he's going to change something, when he is going to confront evil, he challenges the faith of all involved. Not just you, not just the one following the calling, but anyone touched by it. Their faith is going to be challenged by this move. And we see this. We see this in Jesus' life too. Not everyone has the faith for what God is doing. I mean, in Jesus' life, the Israelites, the teachers of the law, the people who should have been his greatest support, were the ones who stood in his way and ended up killing him. It's really I hate to say a fact, but it's a hard thing. Especially and it happens when you're put into leadership, and like in Moses' case, the people you're sent to serve are rejecting you and don't want they don't have faith for what God has called you to do. And this is what we're seeing at the Israelites, that every time they come against something, they end up turning on Moses and on God and really sinking into fear. Fear really brings the worst out in us. If you need any example of that, just look back to COVID-19 quarantine and what people became and did and what we found ourselves saying and doing during that time of fear. So let's look at their response when we come to the Red Sea. Now, keep in mind, it says that when they left Egypt, they left armed for battle, which is interesting. The direct route would have led them through the Philistine country, but it says God didn't want them to go into battle because they weren't ready for that yet. They would have turned away. So they end up circumventing Philistine country and going to the Red Sea, and then instead of the Philistines, they have the much greater Egyptian army that they're set up to fight. But, again, their faith comes to its limit. And they had faith. You see, I'll go back. Passover was really a step of faith for the Israelites because they were all supposed to sacrifice a lamb. They were supposed to dress in their traveling clothes, sandals on, quickly made bread, no time to rise, no yeast in it. And it was an act of faith that they were going to be delivered. And actually, it united them, I believe, as a group. So we see them when they come to the Red Sea, they are united as a group. They are a people group. They're in the middle of being delivered. But when they see the army, instead of their freedom at stake, it's actually their lives. So again, after one great miracle, bam, their faith is put to an even greater test. I don't know if you've ever been through that personally, where you make it through something that you thought stretched you to the limit, and in a very short of time, bam, here we are again to something even more difficult that you need to believe for. So let's go to their response in Exodus 14, verses 10. You getting there, Max? He's got his actual paper Bible out. So I'm making sure, not getting ahead of him here. All right, chapter 14, verse 10. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? This is what they're saying to Moses. What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? I don't know if they actually said that, but at this point they think they did. We don't want to be delivered. What are you talking about? We want to stay here and serve. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Ouch. Poor Moses. Interesting enough, though, this response from them does not send him into a swirl of insecurity like it has other times. Because as we saw, he's gotten so confident in his calling and in his leadership that he tells them, hey, don't be afraid. God's going to deliver you. I don't care if I don't talk well. God's got our back. So that's amazing to see how his response has changed to them at this point. So let's see what happens. It says, now we're going to jump to... I'm sorry, Max. I'm just making you go all over the place. I can just see him right there. Okay, so we're going to go down to verse 29 to 31. This is the end of chapter 14. What happens to the Israelites, even though they're stacking all their fear at Moses and attacking him? It says, but the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And let's see where they've come to. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Now, this isn't the end of this Israelites versus Moses thing. It's very frustrating. We're going to see it a lot playing through the rest of Exodus. But this is definitely a climax and a shifting point in the Israelites' faith. At this point, they believe God now that there's a sea between them and Egypt and dead Egyptians on the shore. They believe God is actually on their side, and he has delivered them. They're not going to go back to slavery anymore. And they believe in Moses. It's an amazing shift that God has brought these people chapters earlier from where they were to this point. And really, I think the miracles God works within a person are so much more amazing and miraculous than the ones he does even in nature. Because people have their own free will. They can do whatever they want, and he can bring them from one place to a completely different, stronger place. And then in the next chapter, we see that a very different people walk away from the Red Sea than walked into it. And chapter 15, the entire chapter, is this beautiful song that they create of gratefulness. So instead of whining and complaining and being very fearful, they just write the song, and it says the women are running around with tambourines, dancing and singing, and they have this wonderful time of just being grateful and thankful for what God has done. It's just such a huge shift. And I know in my life, I know God is working in me when I suddenly become grateful. Because that is not a natural state of being for me. I don't know about you guys. But really, when you're in tune with God and seeing what he's doing and in tap with him, you become so grateful just that he sees you, and you become aware of the miracles that he's doing and what he is doing in you, in the people around you, and in your circumstances. It just, I want to have us just be aware that we don't fall into the trap that the Israelites did of when we get afraid of what's going on, we take it out on our leadership, especially in the church. I know our church right now is going through a lot of changes that can be very scary. We don't know exactly what building we're going to be in a year from now. We're changing our name. How is that going to affect us? We've invested a lot into a website. I know Joe and I just recently had an Israelite moment when Joe, he was in a meeting and he saw the website, and Joe's a draftsman, so detail is everything to him. And he came out and he said, Marie, this website, the fonts are wrong. There are spaces where there should not be spaces. A couple of the links don't work, he said. And I could just see the fear in his eyes, and he's like, this was a huge mistake. Like, and then I kind of, and I'm so glad we didn't, but if in that moment we had called Pastor Sam and just shot him with that fear and been like, this is a huge mistake, you're taking us down with this is never going to work. And I've done that to my pastors before. I think a lot of us have. That knee-jerk reaction to attack them with what you're having trouble believing is going to work out. Thank God we didn't this time. And we ended up, we talked about it. We're like, okay, let's get all the information first. Let's figure out what's going on. And Joe ended up calling Sam a couple days later, had this lovely conversation, found out we had the wrong impression. The website is not finished. And we get to, this was just kind of a look over, and we were thinking, this is it, we're putting it up. So we were really running on misinformation and not really understanding what was going on. And in response, Joe was so passionate about the website and the spacing and the font and everything that he's now on the board to help finish the website. And now he's very excited about it and excited to finish it and get all the right spacing where it needs to be and make sure every link works. So during times, especially in a church when things are uncertain, let's be sure and bring that initial fear or anger response to God. I mean, you should never follow a leader blindly, but nothing comes of sucker punching them with your fear or not confronting them and then just stepping back and, we're going to River Valley next week. Let's go back. We're done. We don't believe in this anymore, because there's that response too. And there's such a lesson here with the Israelites, and it's something that is just part of humanity and something that they had to learn, that each one of us has to learn, and that I'm learning in my own life, is to not respond out of fear. Not respond out of fear. Take that to God. Then when if you have to confront someone, you confront them, you gain knowledge, you find out what's going on, and then you watch. You listen to God, kind of like Moses said when he said, don't be afraid. What did he exactly say? I'm going to go back to that. It was so good. I just want to make sure I get it right. Oh, don't be afraid. Stand firm and watch the deliverance God is going to bring you today. And then be still. Quiet yourself so you can actually listen to where God is leading. It's a beautiful thing for where we are right now. And I just pray that just as individuals and as a church, we would be able to move in our callings like Moses did. We'd be able to have the faith that God grew in the Israelites. We'd be able to confront the pharaohs and the resistance we get as we're moving forward, just like God did for them. And we'd be able to recognize the difference God is doing in ourselves and in the people around us. It's so good to take stock of where you were a few years ago and where your faith was and what the situation was and how you reacted to it, and then look today and say, oh my goodness, I would have reacted so differently and poorly to this. Like I said, some of God's greatest miracles are right inside. And those need to be acknowledged as much as the physical ones. I'm going to end with just a small excerpt from chapter 15, which is their song of gratefulness. It says, then Moses and the Israelites, Natalie made a slide for it. Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and the driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. My Father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior, and the Lord is his name. God, I just pray for every person here, God, that you be with them, for the rest of this week and in their small churches next week. Lord, that we would be able to have moments of stillness where we hear you, God, and we take stock of and notice, Lord, the amazing work you're doing, not just in nature and in the physical world, but within ourselves, Father. I just pray safety for everyone and blessings. In your name, amen.